All right. Good morning, everyone. I want to welcome you to the Gadfly Multi-Channel Network. I want to thank all of our subscribers for supporting our work over here at the Gadfly. If this is your first time tuning in, that you're listening to a Gadfly live stream, thank you for tuning in. If you're learning about our work, you can find us over at thegadfly.vhx.tv. We also have some social media handles that you can follow our work as well. So you can jump over to Twitter and follow us there as well, which is at the Gadfly MCN. And then also we do have a Facebook page as well for our work, which is at the Gadfly. Today, I'm very excited to be joined by contributor London Paul. London Paul does his primary work over at theseersreport.com. Many of you are very familiar with his work, probably even subscribe to his daily podcast, the information that he shares. I'm a subscriber as well. My favorite are his double podcast days when he's playing catch up between topics. So, and today, let me state the date. Today is Wednesday, March the 10th. Paul, great day. How are you, sir?
Yeah, very well. And yourself?
Doing great, Paul. We're starting to get some warm weather here in the Midwest. We had 60 degrees for a couple of days. So I was very inclined to go ahead and get my shorts and my flip-flops out, Paul, to start enjoying it officially.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to do that here. It's probably about 12 degrees. It is grey, miserable, damp. Just what you'd expect from British weather.
Also want to welcome those in the live chat that are there. So thank you for tuning in. Hari, who's always here early and getting his comments in. So thank you for that. Welcome, Jay Crypto, Linus. So some people tuning in. Paul, we had started this conversation probably a good month ago as the transition occurred in the administration. And one of the things that I think is a really good follow-up discussion, and not only in follow-up as we look to arrears, but also looking forward, is just the Trump impact, or there's different words you can use for it, whether it's the Trump dilemma, the Trump impact, whatever you call it. But I think we should have a fair assessment, an honest conversation, and then more importantly, as we navigate through the change, to assess what role Donald Trump may play in forthcoming U.S. elections.
Yeah, most certainly. I mean, I think in many respects, whilst we won't focus as much on the past, I think there's been, he's kind of like, obviously, whatever people's perspective on the election is, and we're not here to discuss what the reality of the election was. He's gone, and to be honest, it's kind of like the sort of fallout of the end of the Trump administration is not how I expected it to be. I mean, we could have sort of said we were concerned about, what the impact would be, and Trump supporters largely, have just sort of taken it and keeping their heads down, and we're not seeing any kind of continuation of people's sort of support in an overt way. Now, okay, I know we can discuss. I mean, obviously, I think one thing worth highlighting, which may give us a bit of an indication as to what Trump's may be intending to do, is his sort of speech at CPAC. But also, we said we kind of look at the whole donations that are being made and that kind of story that's coming out, and because I think that's also important in the context of what's unfolding. But I mean, it's the Biden administration. There's still people out there who somehow think Trump's the president, or was going to be the president on the 4th of March, which is nonsense. No, it's April. No, maybe it's June. I mean, who knows when it's going to be? But of course, it's never going to be. And people just need to accept, whether they agree, disagree, are furious about Biden or otherwise, really doesn't matter anymore. The US is where it is. There's a Biden administration, whatever that means in reality, bearing in mind, of course, that like all Western political establishments, they're not run by the politicians, as we know. It's whether you want to call it special interest group. I like to kind of refer to it as spheres of influence, and that remains undiminished. And we've yet to see any major significant deviations in policy, perhaps save for Iran. And there's been some mutterings and potential potentially big changes, but yet, it's words and they need to be backed up by actions. But most certainly, there is going to be focus on Trump going forward. What are his intentions? What is he going to, stand in 4 years' time again? Is he not? Was he going to form his own political party, or is he just going to consider himself as the kind of runner for the Republican nomination in 2024? What his intentions and what? And for me, it's sort of a bit questionable at this point as to what his motivations are and why he's doing certain things which concern me greatly.
It's an interesting dynamic, the following, the support that Donald Trump still receives. If you look at the amount of votes that he had, it's fairly concise that he by far is the favorite in terms of the Republican Party. And it's a very interesting dynamic because you're correct, Paul. Whenever he attended CPAC, he assured the audience that he wasn't going to divide the GOP. He was going to stay steadfast. But then we did have conflicting messages because shortly afterwards, which was being reported, which is factual, he actually sent a cease and desist order to the GOP, asking them to stop fundraising using Trump's name with that. So it's very interesting, and why we're having this conversation, I think, as we navigate through the years of the Biden administration. By far, Paul, we will definitely be critical of everything that we should be, and applaud when there is a window to do that. Kind of the same thing that we did, with Trump along the way, with some of the enthusiasm that we had. But Paul, I thought one place that we could start would be just in terms of Trump and remove the individual, but looking at the Trump impact. And I think where we have to give credit where credit is due is that for the most part, Trump did expose quite a bit as it relates to the media, to the quote unquote the deep state. There were several amount of people who were in an assessment kind of red pilled in regards to some of the things that were unfolded, and we witnessed for 3 years, close to 4 years, an attempt to remove a sitting president. We don't have to hash it all out, but I thought, Paul, we could give some credit where credit is due in terms of what Trump did expose quite a bit of. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there are some positives. Some of them intentionally. I think some of them unintentionally. But yes, he most certainly shone a great big light on the political establishment in the United States. I mean, the establishment didn't help themselves with these farcical impeachment claims, which were just nonsensical. They were an utter non-starter, and the second one was more embarrassing than the first one. But yes, he also shone a very big light on the media and the lack of objectivity. The only problem is, again, he took it too far, and then when there was legitimate criticism of him, it's just fake news, and all his supporters went, it's fake news. But yes, they were very helpful. He could have gone a lot further in terms of shining the light on things. I mean, the obvious case was he could have disclosed all the JFK files and decided not to. He could have pardoned Assange and didn't, and so there were opportunities missed. I mean, he didn't shine a whole bunch of light on the whole financial institution. I mean, he's very critical of the financial system, the Fed, and all that before he came in office. And of course, at no point did he shine light. In fact, he did everything to placate those institutions and to give tax cuts to the people who shouldn't be given tax cuts, and to try and relax some of the legislation that reined in some of the ludicrous speculation, not entirely, that goes on in Wall Street. But yes, he did a lot to highlight the dysfunctional nature of politics and the media, of which that is no small feat. Ironically, in terms of foreign policy, at times my statement when he stood to be president was well, before he was, that Trump will be nominated as the Republican choice, and provided there's no interference in any capacity, he'll be the future U.S. president. He was the future US president, and there was an expectation that he'd kind of take this wrecking ball to the whole sort of deep state, special interest in spheres of influence groups, which he didn't do for whatever reason. And they were missed opportunity. He took a kind of wrecking ball to some of the US allies, but rather unintentionally, and he made big mistakes in terms. And the biggest, people may disagree, but his policy towards China was absolutely ridiculous. It was the last thing he was supposed to. He was supposed to. Okay, Russia was difficult. It would have been difficult if he'd just been a Russian president, an American president, without all the Russiagate nonsense. So we can forgive him in part for that, because that would have been a difficult situation to manage. But China, as I've said, it was an enormous failure, because he did exactly what he shouldn't have done with the Chinese. And ultimately, the US is going to, at some point, have to rein back all that rhetoric. I mean, it might not be this year, it might be next year, it could be next week, we don't know. I mean, there is an upcoming summit between the Chinese and the US officials that's slated to be in Alaska. So let's see what, if anything of substance comes out of that. It may be something, nothing, or everything. But so the worst of chances for him to have made some differences, he didn't really, in any way to reform the political system in any way. He just shone a light on it and said, well, it's very dysfunctional, but that's not a criticism. He was never going to be able to do things single-handedly. And he also put people into positions, that kind of Pompeo's, the Barrs, and all these kind of people. He put them into positions of authority, and it was really a very, very bad decision. They weren't working in his favor whatsoever. And okay, we can argue about the whys and wherefores of the election itself, but Trump's out after one term. Will he stand in the future? Well, that remains to be seen, and it remains to be seen precisely what his intentions are. I think there was a lot of expectation that he would kind of form his own political party, become very independent, and on that basis, he could, posed a significant threat to the establishment. I don't see how possibly he can, well, whether he gets the nomination or even stands in 2024, I do not believe that he's going to be able to, even if he gets the nomination, even if he stands, just let's say he wins, he's not going to change things any differently than he did in 2016 to 2020 if he's elected in 2024. It's just not going to change. I mean, unless the entire political landscape of the United States has changed, which is possible. I mean, we are in this huge transitional phase, this paradigm shift, I think, sort of inflection point, but your political systems don't disappear overnight. They take a long time. I personally don't see any point in him kind of bolting himself onto the Republicans again and then trying to obviously root out all the elements within the Republican Party who don't kind of, sort of fulfill his criteria of what I mean, there's the old sort of rhinos are the obvious ones. I mean, they have not a significant influence, but for anyone who's not aware, I'm sure people are, but if they're not, the rhinos are supposed to be Republicans in name only. And people like Romney's one of those, is an example of this, who have been very anti-Trump. And there are some who are very vocal about it and others who are not. But I think at the moment, with regard to, and maybe there's some things that are worth discussing that he talked at the CPAC, I kind of jotted it was a few points that became enormous amounts of points, but maybe we can just pick on some of those, and because that may give some indication of the way forward. And okay, he's gone on the attack with regards to the Biden administration. Well, that's fine, and there are some legitimate reasons for it. but it's a little bit too early in the day.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
save your energy for a later date. Give it a year or two. Don't start, on the all-out assault at this point in time, because frankly, most people's attention span, they'll forget next week what he said anyway.
Paul, I think that in terms of the independent voter, and not to internalize things quite a bit, and I try not to do that, but it's difficult when you're commenting on things. But as an independent voter, looking back to, and we've stated this, numerous times in regards to a lot of the things that candidate Trump stated he was able to attract a lot of independent voters. Everything from his views on the foreign conflicts with war that resonated with me, from his standpoint in regards to the stock market being rigged and manipulated, to questioning the safety of certain vaccines, and committing to assigning an individual person to head up some studies and to question that. So there were several things that he said that personally resonated with me, and where I'm tying this into is that one thing in particular I remember, Paul, in my corporate America days, was a review. You know how when you're in corporate America, how you typically get an annual review, and sometimes you get a raise, sometimes you don't, sometimes you get a pat on the back, and they're not really intended to be a cheerleading session. They're meant to be an honest conversation. And I had a fantastic boss. I to this day, I still the utmost respect, still keep up with them. And this was probably my second year of being in the position, and it was a very challenging market that I took over, and made some significant amount of progress into it, but at the same time fell short quite a bit. And I'll never forget this review. It was probably the most difficult review that I've had, and I'm sure that on his part as well, that it was difficult to deliver. But it stuck with me, and I kind of followed. He really mentored me, because when I gave reviews of my team members and my employees, I kind of followed the same suit, that the worst thing that you can do is to not be honest, or to really to just kind of shield them from where they need to focus. Now, you don't have to beat them down, but you also need to let them know where there are shortcomings. And what I remember from this conversation, my review, is that this was probably the only year that I ever received a needs improvement. And it was a very tough pill to swallow, but I'll never forget, at the end of the day, when we looked over the metrics, whether it was profit margin or contribution A profit, or execution dynamics, customer service dynamics, he said, listen, he goes, you put a lot of hard work in, you did a lot of things, but results matter. And if you're not getting the results, then I'm not doing you a favor by saying you meet expectations when your results are way off the par. So why I'm going somewhere with this, so the people listening, give me a little leeway here. So what I'm getting at is that results do matter, and it's not just a matter that you like a person, or this person is patriotic. You have to measure specifically the benchmark of those results. And that, to me, is being honest. And that was one of the things that I think, in regards to Trump, that I was being very fair in my assessment, because if you looked at a lot of the metrics in terms of his execution, in terms of his role of president of the United States, there were a significant amount of shortcomings that happened. And that led me to really to disconnect, from his administration, from say, hey, look, you know what, something is not right here. You could look at his first initial tax cut plan, which basically gave even more wealth to the 1%, the corporate tax cuts, that there was really no goals or objectives that were identified with those tax cuts to specifically use the funds for reinvestment into the United States, for manufacturing, expansion, maybe bringing infrastructure, back to the United States. And what did the corporations do with that? They took those funds and they rolled it right back into aggressive stock buyback programs, inflating their stock price. The 1%, the wealth extraction occurred again from the middle class to the top 1%, really not achieving the results that it should have. You can take a look at not only that, you can take a look at the fact that after the 2 years in the tenure, that he failed to hold Tom Ryan accountable, who was the Speaker of the House at the time being. There was a really lack of any type of working through the legislative side, and I think it backfired with him because, again, after the 2-year mark, he lost the House. So there are several other examples that I can map out in terms of where their shortcomings took place. And personally, that's why when I looked at Trump in terms of his impact, in terms of measuring it, I could understand why. Now, again, one can question the validity and everything that took. We're not here to discuss the election results, but where we stand today, Joe Biden is the president, and I think results matter in terms of that. So what are your thoughts, Paul, on that? I know I went on forever, but in regards to results matter, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Trump it was said to me, and it was my understanding, that Trump, there was a whole bunch of objectives that Trump was supposed to achieve. And, he didn't achieve those. Okay, we can talk about how he was hamstrung, and I'm not disputing that, but he knew that was going to be the case. Okay, I don't dispute wanting to be the American president, or thinking, well, when I'm president, I'm going to do, A, B, and C, and then actually becoming president and understanding as a non-politician the machinations of how the political system works would be a big shock to any of us. And I think he can probably totally underestimated the task at hand. But then he subsequently lost his way and started not actually doing anything he was supposed to do. And I think this reflects in this CPAC speech he gave recently, where there was some interesting comments interspersed with. I mean, I don't want to get into all the, we're going to win and all the kind of vacuous comments that I frankly feel. It's the one thing that, as soon as Trump says any of that, you just switch off because it's just meaningless words. But he did acknowledge again that this historical struggle that exists for the US's future, and he says it's institutions. I don't know what he means by borders, and its cherished principles, and therefore, our prosperity, our identity, and our security, everything is at stake. And yes, but that's in the context of what his understanding was before he ever became president, or even stood to become the US president. But of course, he'll then come out and go, well, and this was telling because everyone thought, well, he didn't achieve the objectives inside the political structure. So the obvious thing is he'll form his own political party. And he made the comment that people said he's going to start, a brand new party. And then he says, but we've got this Republican Party. It's going to unite, be stronger than ever. Well, that's with him at the helm. That won't be the case. So, no, it's all fake news. I'm not going to start a new party because it will divide the vote. So you can't ever win. Well, there's an element of truth in that. But if he's going to stand inside the political system, there's the floating voters of the future are going to go, well, he never achieved it as a kind of quasi representative of the Republican Party. So why is he going to succeed in the future? And yeah, he made a big push in his speech regarding the whole immigration issue, and that's just trying to inflame his voter base, which at this point in time is ridiculous. He did, of course, and you make the point where he talked about his opposition to vaccines or concerns about it, and then kind of was just going, well, the Trump administration did more for vaccines, than any other part of the world. I mean, as though there was some big cheerleading the whole process, which mean he completely turned his back on previous statements he'd made on this matter. And he talked about sort of what's going on with the US military and how he wanted to bring everyone home, and there is an element of truth in that. He did want to bring people home, but then equally he was signing off effectively for sort of mercenaries to replace the US forces. So it was just a sleight of hand, effectively. And that is obviously a concern. He talked about the whole energy sector, and there's no doubt that Biden cancelling the Keystone Pipeline has had an immediate impact on US jobs. maybe 10,000 more jobs, and then there's the indirect consequences of this, and of course he talks about fracking, and frankly the whole fracking industry we've discussed before is in terminal decline, and therefore had no long-term future, and as a consequence he's already trying to claim, Trump, that we're now relying on Russia and the Middle East for oil, and the truth of the matter is the shale sector was effectively mean pumping oil at a loss. It was never, making America economic or energy in terms of energy independent in any way, shape, or form. Is still importing huge amounts of oil. And the truth of the matter is that the shale sector is being destroyed, and the low oil prices have contributed to that. And note now that the US is a net importer of oil. We've seen oil prices rising, which actually is going to hammer the US economy, as we've seen. And we've talked about the price of, you call it gas, a gallon of gas. I mean, I've had quite a lot of people telling me about across the US the big hikes they're now paying now, and that was kind of an inevitability. When you get a huge hike in oil prices, then for the US as a net importer now, it's going to cost them significantly more to buy a barrel of oil, and therefore by definition there is also, that's going to create inflationary costs in terms of a gallon of gas. But equally, of course, there's all the inflation in commodities, as we've seen. So he effectively is saying, well, I'm going to stay part of the Republican Party. I'm not going to go out on my own, and and I'm going to do all the things that I intended to do previously. But maybe I'll stand in 4 years, maybe I won't, and we want to create this visionary future. All the same kind of statements he made previously, which of course mean absolutely nothing. And you're kind of left with the theme where he again had to go on the assault about China, and we need to stand up to them, and we need to bring our factories back and supply chains, and he even went as far as saying that in fact these companies who won't come back, who don't want to come back, that somehow they should be sanctioned and punished for the fact they refused to come back from China and domicile back in the United States, which of course is economically insanity from their perspective. So tariffing them and fining them and maybe even sanctioning them, of course, is frankly ludicrous. Yes, he does make statements regarding the electoral system. There's no doubt that needs to be sorted out. Yes, he talks about big tech monopolies needing to be addressed, and that we completely agree with. But there's this rather kind of, well, I'm going to be part of the traditional political system. And then, as you stated at the start, he's then telling Republicans, well, actually, you need to donate to my PAC rather than the GOP because the money's all getting wasted. So he's got this Save America, which is Trump's PAC, saying, well, I maintain, support of the Republican Party, but, and it's important, GOP committees, but I don't support the rest of it. And therefore, they can't use my image rights to raise funds. And therefore, the best way for you, rather than wasting your money on these GOP, is to donate to Save America PAC, at donaldjtrump.com. And you're helping, the America First movement, and, blah, 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 we're going to win, Now, that statement was obviously an indication Trump's not going to appease the Republican National Committee. I mean, obviously there was this, as you say, a cease and desist letter demanding it stop referencing Trump in its fundraising and merchandising. So there is this contradiction, and my obvious question is, has Trump got any intention of standing in 4 years? I mean, and in which case, if he's raising all this money, where's it being spent? I mean, and I don't know how much money was raised. Remember, there was all these donations to his legal fighting fund. I don't know what was ultimately raised. But where was all that money spent, and where was it spent, and how was it spent? And my question is, if you're raising funds for a PAC now for, to all intents and purposes, what, 3 years and 8 months out from the next presidential elections, what's the money being spent on and why? And I don't know. The honest answer is we don't know. But these are questions. Forget Republicans. Trump supporters should be asking this question. I mean, if you're fully behind the Republican Party, okay, you've got these rhinos and other people you don't agree with. But if you're saying don't donate to them and donate to me, then are you really actually supportive of the Republican movement, or are you just trying to convince people you are, and maybe ultimately intends to stand as an independent? But he feels at this point in time, well, if I come across like that, then I'm going to lose some of the benefits of tying myself to the Republican Party. And the question is, do they even want Trump as a nomination in the future in 4 years' time? And I think, or under 4 years or 3 years or whatever it might be in the sort of circus that is US politics. And the question is, we don't know. And I think that raises some serious questions as to what Trump's future intentions are. And at the moment, they're just not clear.
It's a very, interesting set of circumstances that they're faced with. I mean, there's a lot that could be said in terms of the lack of GOP support of Trump through the years in office, and never was that more relevant as it related to the last few months with Mitch McConnell. I was really looking forward to a brave, bold statement at CPAC. At this point, with the following that Trump has, he literally could probably bankrupt the GOP if he really wanted to, Paul. And I mean that seriously. He could, outside of individual voters. Corporations is a lot different. We knew that a lot of the money, a lot of the corporation, the business administration things, really directed a lot of their efforts towards Joe Biden, and that's a fact. But getting after the individual support, you would think with the lack of support, I don't want to call it stabbing in the back of the GOP. I think one could easily refer to that he has a very unique opportunity in time, much of which exposing a lot of the criminality in regards to the media, the tech giants, and now also exposing that a little bit with the political process. He had an opportunity to do that, and more that I was kind of looking for was that bold movement, that bold statement to say, hey, look, there's a lot of people within, and can you, gosh, there's so much I want to say here, but can you really even call it a conservative party anymore? Right. When you see a conservative party that signs on for this massive pandemic aid where, billions of dollars went, overseas during that time period. And I don't want to get too far off the topic here. And why we're having this conversation, Paul, to me is important because it's probably for another day, but I think it's fair enough to assess it in terms of, is Trump there as a barrier or as a distraction to keep us tied into this left-right paradigm and away from some of the hardships that we're facing. And I think the risk is this. Here's the risk. The risk is that in 2 years, whether it's the midterm elections or 2024, the new election cycle, the risk is this: is that if Trump is not willing to make a decision at this point, a bold, firm decision to just come out and say, hey, I am running again in 2024. I'm putting my name in the hat right now. I'm raising funds because this is what we're going to do. Is there a risk that's further damage done and more progress is made in the deconstruction, if you will, of our republic? Think of it this way: how many candidates that potentially could run? Rand Paul. I can't remember the governor from Florida. DeSantis, is that his name? DeSantis.
Yeah, I think so.
So many other people that could be getting the momentum, getting the funds, preparing, organizing, versus him keeping this dilemma that's going to be out there for a long time, a while now, and potentially that could create more harm than good. So it's a very interesting dynamic, that we're heading into these next few years. But there's no doubt the media will keep, Trump in the news. They do so because we know that the media made a lot of money when Trump was in office. The media made significant amount of money while he was there, and with Sleepy Joe in office, it's kind of hard to make any money when they won't criticize anything that he says or does, Paul.
Yeah, and I think you talk about risk. I mean, let's just break this down a little bit more. You had obviously what had this caused this cease and desist order was the fact that the RNC, and for anyone who's not aware, there's the NRSC, which is the National Republican Senatorial Committee, and then there's the NRCC, which is the National Republican Congressional Committee. Now, they're the sort of notional largest fundraising bodies for the Republican Party. And of course, they'd sent out these fundraising solicitations, which was citing Trump, and that sort of ignited this issue. Now, if Trump's kind of opposing those bodies, then the question is, to what extent is he actually tying himself to the Republicans? And what seems quite clear is that he is on one level. So therefore, what effectively he wants to remove all the elements, the rhinos and the other disagreeing elements within the GOP and everything else. So he just wants all the kind of the House and the Senate to be fully supporting him as an individual, and those who aren't, well, when there's primaries, we're going to put candidates supportive of me against you. So he wants this like 100% loyal Republican Party, and therefore the argument is that that's a potentially something he could achieve. The only thing is, it probably won't work, and in fact, the irony is all this kind of infighting that you would see in the Republicans is only going to actually impact any chance of them flipping the House or the Senate in the midterms. It's kind of elude. I find the U.S. political systems incredible. You're already talking about the midterms, and Biden's barely, had a month or 6 weeks in office. I mean, it seems the aforementioned, the RNC, the NRCC, and the NRSC are all kind of trying to say, well, we want to downplay these disagreements. We're looking forward to working with him, as we head into the 2022 midterms, and but the issue is this is my personal viewpoint. If Trump, for argument's sake, wanted to stand again, then standing as an independent would be far more beneficial. Bear in mind, he's had a term as president. He's going to be able to say things a lot more freely than he does inside the political establishment. And and if he's going to win, then the argument is, okay, he's probably going to win on the basis of the fact that in the next 4 years, the US is going to be upended economically, financially. Its whole monetary system is going to be exposed. It's the end of the dollar, effectively, as the world reserve currency, the end of US hegemony. I mean, we said before, in some ways, you better not being in office in the next 4 years than being in office. So the argument is that Trump, if he stands again in 4 years, and there's lots of variables and permutations, but one may argue he could say all the right things in 3 years' time and say, well, look at all these things that have happened, the utter failure of the Biden administration, but he could say, and the political system is failing, and then go on the attack of all the things he stated prior to 2016, and then stand as an independent and galvanize a voter base, and be able to say all the things he should have said, be able to be then, successfully as an independent become president. The problem with that is, I mean, there are obvious advantages. The problem is, though, he can be the president and he's still going to be hamstrung by the House and the Senate, unless he intends to, which you can't really do, is put a load of independents in all over the United States, which you, in principle, you could do, but what's the logistics? What's the cost implication? How could you actually do that? Where therefore, in principle, he could then start to have a dominant position in the House and the Senate and become an independent president. I mean, that's the real ideal kind of scenario you want, where I think people are disillusioned with mainstream politics. It's certainly happened in the UK increasingly, and people want an alternative. Now, I'm not suggesting Trump's the future. I'm just speculating as to, okay, let's look at the scenario with Trump in that situation. And, it might be possible. But it's like in this country, we've got 650 MPs or something. You're going to need 326 to form a government. To have the policy decisions is one thing as an independent, and you could have the greatest policy decisions ever, but to galvanize the people to vote for you as an independent, and for you to get 326 independent MPs who are going to back you and support your very radical independent policies is a huge ask. You might form a party. If you win in this country currently 1 or 2 or 3 seats, that'd be deemed as an incredible performance. So these are the challenges as an independent. But I think the idea that he's going to somehow come into office again, he'll get the nomination, he's going to reform the Republican Party so it runs how he wants it to run in the future. And then somehow magically he's going to do all the things he should have done last time around and didn't. It is a hell of a reach. And my argument is, okay, what's the purpose of fundraising at this juncture anyway? What exactly are you going to do at this point? There's no point in fundraising at this particular point in time. If you want to make donations for political parties, that's fine, but this is a period where if you're in opposition, you should be going, okay, what are we going to do? What could be our long-term policy decision? How can we constructively, critique the current administration? This is assuming, of course, as we said, that political parties have any relevance, given we know it's a gigantic game, and that's why it never happens, because that's what you would do in a real political situation if you were booted out as a truly democratic political party in a nation. You'd be standing there going, what do we do wrong? How do we change? What future policy decisions can we implement to be re-elected? But the one thing the Biden administration is going to have to do rather uniquely, it's going to have to start considering domestic issues like it's never had to deal with before, because the US economy is in the complete collapse that it is. Its monetary policy decisions are reaching the end of the line. Their ability to bluff the way through things, after 12 years is coming to an end. So there are a lot of these, ongoing political situations where they can take advantage of that. But the idea Trump can completely control the Republican Party and effectively make it a brand new independent Republican Party. I'm going to weed all the people out who don't serve the purpose and serve, my vision for the future is to me myopic. It's not a reality. And the other problem is, even if you do that and you become president, you're still going to have the problem that you get of trying to make the enormous amounts of changes, because you're still going to be hamstrung by what the opposition is in terms of and how they will balk everything. And eventually the problem with any political system is you might be able to put all the people in you want, but are they ultimately going to deliver, or will they be consumed by this political system? So it's a very challenging problem. I think if you were to form a grassroots political party in the United States, you wouldn't be looking at winning in 4 years. Although, given what happens, anything's possible in this, very very fluid kind of paradigm shift. But more realistically, you might say in 8 years, you may be able to form a third political party that the masses are going to vote for. That, if you make the right decision, you might get the financing, you might be able to start to get non-political people into the House and the Senate who are able to effectively manage this big transition. But the idea that Trump in 4 years is going to revolutionize anything is not going to happen. And I don't believe Trump, for all the rhetoric, would actually believe that he.
Yeah, very well said, Paul. It's very interesting, and you said something in particular in regards to just the realignment that's occurring, geopolitically, and we can save the discussion for another day. But we know that for years that they've always utilized the political process in regards to the ability to to divide and conquer and consistently keep us at odds with each other. In the meantime, there's large events unfolding that are currently happening, and I think it's fair to throw in the question is to is there a role that Trump is currently playing to help with that? Is there if you can question a lot of the things, I mean, never in my lifetime would I have thought the advancement that we've witnessed of the things that have taken place, that we would have allowed that without having a significant amount of the people who were supporting those ideas and justifying it. I would have never have envisioned that in the course of what's it been, like 4 months, in the course of 4 months, that we would have witnessed a massive $2.3 trillion spending bill. And then we would follow that up with what's currently on the table, Paul, like 1.9
Yeah, 1.9 trillion.
So we're looking at, in the course of less than 3 months, close to $5 trillion. I would have never envisioned that in my lifetime. But because these things were taking place and people supported it, and they still will, people will say, well, listen, the greatest pandemic ever, all these things, it had to be done, it had to be taking place. It wasn't the pandemic that did this. It was government. It was government that decided to take these actions to shut down the economy, to do these things. I would never in my lifetime would envision that people would be okay with this type of spending. I would have never thought in my lifetime that we'd be okay with people justifying an Operation Warp Speed to streamline the proper clinical studies, the proper research on new technologies as it relates to vaccines, but yet we have millions of people lined up to do these, and all of these things were in some way, shape, and form were brought to us courtesy of Donald J. Trump. Paul, that's my opinion. I know a lot of people will look at it differently, but it's here. I never thought that we'd get into this point, but I think that because so many people were just supporting the ideas that were brought forth with the previous administration, regardless, this is where we've arrived.
Yeah, and one of the biggest problems with the acceptance of all this, and the US is a great example of this, is what was the one thing Trump kept telling people? We've got the greatest US economy ever. The stock market, which is the barometer, of course, for US, economic prowess is a record high, is what we know the reality of it. I mean, yeah, the Venezuelan stock market's at record highs, enough said. Let's put this into context. We know it bears no resemblance to economic reality, but by convincing people of this on an individual basis, people, and it's the same in the UK, people think the economy was fine, so oh, well, it's okay. Yeah, there's a bit of a problem. I know. Let's just furlough people. Well, and it's just a blip. Once this pandemic's over, then everything will flip back to normal like a light switch, and the economy will come roaring back to life. Because don't worry, people have got all this enormous amounts of money they haven't spent since the lockdown. Not that 750, 800,000, and that's what they admit to. It could be 1 million a week of Americans have lost their jobs. And then there's claim, oh, well, they're not unemployed for very long. which of course is nonsense. US unemployment's probably 30% in reality. But because people believe this, they went, oh well, it's okay, it's a bit of a blip. So I mean, it's like I said to someone the other day with regards to all the furlough, and they're going to carry it on till September. Well, your people are furloughed, and if they think that their job exists, why aren't they doing the job? Okay, there's people in hospitality that clearly doesn't apply, but there are a lot of people out there who are furloughed, and it's simply because their job doesn't exist. And once the job doesn't exist, the furlough stops, the companies will make them redundant. So there's a lot of misconception, and Trump fueled that, in the United States about all the economic prowess of things. So people kind of bought into something, but we always said all along that the pandemic was an accelerant of the collapse of everything. So suddenly they had to start printing trillions of dollars, and it's a black hole. So the money will just keep being sucked in. It will be spent wherever it's spent, and if you've got a business that's bankrupt, the business is not going to miraculously stop being bankrupt or a deficient, unreliable business because you give it more money. If the business model's failed for whatever reason, whether it's your own fault, whether it's unintentional, whether it's just market forces, it's not going to succeed because you give it a load more money. And the whole strategy has to change. And of course, at the moment, we're in that cycle where, and to be brutally honest, if they don't pump trillions into the economy or into banks or wherever the money's going, the US, the UK would just collapse in a blink of an eye. So their attitude, we can't allow that to happen. No, they can't. But so they're stuck in this thing where it's just printing money, it's QE to infinity, and now of course everything's breaking, and they're having to pump money into the real economy. So their worst fears are being realized, and the pandemic's caused that. It's caused everything they never wanted to happen because they, in their delusional minds, thought we'll be able in the future at some point, even though after 10 years they hadn't, we can normalize interest rates somehow. This huge debt bubble will magically disappear, and they're talking like that in the UK, that somehow £2 trillion of debt can be paid down. Somehow we'll impose some form of tax increases, although they've deferred that to years in the future. So there's a realization they can't fix anything. But if you convince people inside a nation this is a transient problem, then they'll believe it. And it's only when this transient problem ceases to be a transient problem that the people will remember this. And this could equally be extremely damaging for Trump in the process, because people will go back and go, hang on a minute. Clearly, this wasn't a short-term problem, because the knives will come out, the spheres of influence will start stabbing each other in the back, the political establishment will get stabbed in the back, and it will turn into this very ugly kind of fallout of what happens when empires do collapse. And if Trump seriously wanted to do anything with the future, he needs to realize that being part of a mainstream political party is not the answer. But it's all short-termism, and we've come back to this point. The US election cycle's 4 years, and it's abysmal failure. Nothing gets achieved. I mean, you become a president, you're a lame duck president if the House is Democrat controlled, if you're a Republican, or vice versa. So it's just rather a futile sort of exercise in politics, and that's by design, where you need a long-term strategy, and Trump's perspective should be, we need to build something long-term. And whether I'm president or not president, let's start a movement, and it could galvanize very quickly given everything that's coming. But everything's short-termism, and I don't think Trump. For me, Trump. It's always about me. It's always, what are people saying about me? Are they? And anyone who disagrees with me shoots them down. He's not interested in the greater good for me and the long-term benefits that a third way of managing US politics that isn't part of the establishment could benefit. And if it's something that comes to fruition and takes 4 years or 8 years or 12 years, or whatever it takes, that should be the goal. But it isn't. It's all short-termism, and How's he going to benefit? How does he look? I mean, that's not the future of politics, and the future of Western politics is abandoning all these political structures and ultimately convincing people there is an alternative way, and that is an enormous undertaking. And you're not going to change those people's attitudes in 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, or it's a long-term process. This is part of the rebuilding of America. So if you want short-term gain, and Trump wants to become president in 4 years, so I'll stand as a Republican. Ultimately, that is going to slow down this huge change the US needs to make by far longer. Because if he stands for another 4 years in this quagmire, then that will take 10 years to resolve, because it's not a linear thing where a year of mainstream politics is resolved by a year of non-mainstream politics or this political establishment. Every year they're in office is creating damage and problems that take exponentially longer to resolve.
Yep, indeed. Paul, I want to thank you for an absolutely fabulous discussion. And for those tuning in for the very first time to a Gadfly live stream, please visit again our work over the gadfly.vhx.tv, where you can learn about our subscription-based network. It's either $10 a month or $100 a year, and you can also sign up for a free 30-day trial. So, Paul, thank you, and let's do this again real soon.
Yes, a real pleasure as ever, and thanks to everyone who supports us and to anyone listening, of course.